Uela raga, e ciao a tutti, benvenuti in questo nuovo video. This is going to be a special English episode of the Weilà Tom Italian Podcast because I think it really applies to people in the larger Italian American community. And also, this channel is a bilingual space, so I will speak both English and Italian. But yeah, I think specifically whenever something talks to the heart of some Italian American things, I like to use English. So here we are. I will try to speak slowly as always because we have many people here on the Weilà Tom channel that want to learn English. So what is the Weilà Tom Italian Podcast? I always give the little introduction when we begin. So this is my podcast where I talk about topics that have to do with the Italian and English language learning experience and things that are of particular interest to me. So, for many years here on my channel, I mostly focused just on language instruction. And obviously, that's still my core mission to spread knowledge about English and Italian. As time went on, a couple years in, I started making more and more advice related videos. That's sort of the unofficial title that I've given to that category of content, where I talk about the language learning process. The more and more I made those videos, the more and more I realized that I think that is what I love. I wouldn't say the most, but it's one of my top loves of language learning. I love the process, the self improvement. You're working on something, and I see correlations in so many other areas of my life. Why I decide to do things, what gets me the most excited about them, what keeps me dedicated and motivated. And it always comes down to I love this game. I love this challenge. I love seeing if I can do it. Can I pull it off? And then also seeing how I improve. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. So the channel naturally went in that direction as well. And then for the longest time, I always wanted to make a podcast, but never knew quite how to go about doing it. And it just felt like the right time about a year ago to do what I love doing, which is making live videos. I love live videos. I've said before, I love the performative aspect of it because you just turn on your camera, you're streaming live, and that's it. You can't edit what you're saying. You can't stop and do a retake. You just got to do it. And I've always loved giving speeches. I do a lot of that outside of YouTube. I've always been in situations where I have to give a presentation, give a speech. And as much as writing and organizing your thoughts is important, there is something so special about that one moment, that one performance. And so often I want to go off script because you want to capture the essence of the moment. You want to be in that moment and do what is necessary for that moment. So yeah, here we are. So now I've been doing these videos. I do them live. I call it my podcast. And so we're also going to talk about some Italian American stuff, which as time has gone on, I've become increasingly more interested in it. Just as another side note, and then obviously we'll get into the meat of today's video. Italian American stuff has always been of interest to me, but it never really was a thing, something that I wanted to study or observe or understand better. And I don't have an exact reason why. I just know that that was always my relationship with the idea. It wasn't something I gave much thought to. However, the more and more I've taught students, the more and more I've become embedded in the Italian world. After spending so much time in the Italy Italian world, really just on that end of the spectrum, it became clear to me that there is this huge community of people, this very large community of people that tend to rally behind this idea of Italian American, what that means, and how to live it out in today's world. And so there was just something there that I wanted to uncover. And there was also one time someone referred to me as Italian American. And there's a reason why that was surprising to me. And I heard that and I said, "Oh, you view me as Italian American." And it was something really innocent. It was just someone who was talking about me, the work I do, and said, "Oh, you should check out Tom's channel. He's an Italian American that teaches Italian." And it just really hit me. And so perhaps if I think back to like a moment in time that I try to trace to as like, maybe that was the spark that lit the fire. Perhaps that could be a plausible theory. That could be a plausible option. It just like hit me. What? And so there's a reason why I'm explaining this. I spent so many years, as I just shared with you guys a few moments ago, completely immersed in the Italy Italian world. That was it. There was no such thing, no mention, no thought of anything to do with Italian American. And so when you spend so much time in the Italian world, you learn that you're not necessarily viewed as Italo-Americano, not all the time. I see that as being something a little bit newer that's coming about in my experience. Everyone lives a different experience. But I was never called Italo-Americano. I also never said I was Italo-Americano. The expression was sono americano di origini italiane. So what does sono americano di origini italiane mean? And even in French, I would say that. Now, when I switch languages, I get a little confused, so give me a moment. Je suis américain d'origine italienne. Yeah, je suis d'origine italienne. And so it's the same exact expression also in French. So there was never this idea of saying je suis italo-américain or sono italo-americano. It just wasn't a thing. And I know I keep saying that, but it is the point. And so only when I was back in the American context, that term would come up. So it sparked this interest. And so the point I'm making is when you spend so much time in the Italian world, and that is not the expression that is used. As I said, it's starting to be used. I think social media is really impacting that. It's starting more and more to be used, but it's still not, I would say, the standard. So I just never applied that term to myself. Only once I started seeing that that is a term one would use that sort of is socially acceptable and widely used in society, I started paying more attention to it. Okay, so a little bit of my background, this idea of the term. And here's something also that's interesting about Italian American as a term and why I'm talking about social media. With the advent really of TikTok, and then we're going to get into why it ain't like it used to in Italian neighborhoods, all of this, and I've explained this before in other videos. If you've been following me for a while, you'll know this is a part of my explaining style, my teaching style. And then you'll start to see traces of this in how other people do things too. Whenever you're explaining something to a large group of people, like I'm doing here on YouTube, you're just talking to the general public. Obviously, people who watch me tend to be people who are in line with my interests, but not always. Your video may attract someone on the outlier of that community. You kind of have to give them a foundation. You have to fill people in on where you're coming from, what has informed you to bring you to the position that you're going to be sharing with them. That's sort of the process in giving the speech. So what I'm doing is kind of showing you a little bit this journey that I've been on. I'm explaining how, yes, I'm American, but my whole journey with learning Italian and then teaching has been really strongly to the far end of Italy Italian things with no consideration of anything Italian American. But as time went on, I start teaching more, start meeting more people, you get older, and then slowly just normal societal things come up and someone calls you Italian American, and it's so much in opposition to what you've always done. It challenged, let's say, a long-held belief. You're like, maybe I want to kind of look into that a little bit because it's interesting. So all of these things start informing you. That's what I'm doing in this process. And I do this also in my other videos in Italian. So if you ever feel that you're lost for a moment, just know that everything always has something to do with the main point. We're just laying groundwork. That's what we're doing. We're trying to bring everybody into the fold at the same time. As one little extra piece, I'll also add, when I teach, what I do is I put everything up on the board. Sort of how people say you lay everything out on the table, that idiomatic expression. When I'm throwing everything up on the board, I'm telling my students, these are the cards you have to work with. Here's how I work with them. Here's how other people work with them. What do you make of it? Now try yourself and have your hand at it. That's my teaching style. That's my explaining style. It's all about being like, here's all the information I'm dealing with. What will you make of it? And that is the interaction that we have as teacher and student and community learner, because we're all really in it together. I'm learning new things every day. If anything, I now understand when I used to hear people older than me say, the older I get, the more I realize I don't know anything. That's what happens. The older you get, you realize, wow, there's a lot more to this than I appreciated. Okay. So I mentioned social media. I think that culturally speaking, the idea in many parts of the world outside of Italy, what is considered Italian is largely informed by what we've seen, right? Movies are really powerful. They're still powerful to this day. However, we now also have another form of media in the form of social media, which is anybody can post anything they want at any time of the day from any part of the world. This is something really interesting in human history if you boil it down and start looking at it in that way. It's something to really be studied and understood, but we're in the midst of it. So it's a little difficult to study something that you're involved in this moment. But the reason why social media and movies and stuff like that is really important when we start talking about culture, cultural identity, things like Italian neighborhoods, why it ain't like it used to, because we are going to be getting to that point. It's because this is how we're sharing stories. If you think about a lot of human history, I know I'm getting a little meta, as sometimes people say, but it's sort of where you go with these things when you're really uncovering them. You know, when you're actually looking into something, you realize, okay, what's actually happening here? What is beneath the surface? When we talk about human history, we pass down information through storytelling. What I'm doing right now is storytelling. Storytelling is something so intrinsically human and something we have done for all of human history. The stories that we tell and the stories that we share is how we also build community. Because when we're thinking about things like community and culture, at the end of the day, these are all ideas. These are customs. These are traditions. They're shared experiences, shared lived experiences, and also imagining what could be. What is our potential? Who were we in the past? Who are we right now? And who will we be? So when you start talking about culture, you get into all of these things. And then also at the heart of it is identity. Who am I? How do I see the world? How am I seen within this world, within this community, within this group, within this time? So it all starts getting really philosophical, if you will. I think that's a good term besides meta to use when talking about it. So we start getting into all these different areas. And obviously, for the sake of this video, we can't touch on everything possible. It would take a lifetime to talk about all these topics. But that's why we make episodes, right? That's why we've got a podcast. That's why it's a continual topic, something we keep going on about. So social media and movies really informs people on certain groups, let's say, like an Italian American group. And so I think what happens is when you see things depicted in a movie, you're looking at it with your eyes. Usually in movies, it's an art form, it's an exaggerated version of something, a caricature. However, there's always some line of truth within it. If it were totally fake and totally made up, who knows how much it would resonate with people? Because you have to see yourself within those characters to resonate with them and to feel something, you know? Movies are often trying to evoke some kind of emotion within you. And that's what happens with social media. As we're sharing stories, we're talking about traditions. Did your family do this? In my family, we do this. And we often put a label on it, such as Italian American. This then starts informing people. Not everyone is going to decide to do a deep dive into a culture to learn everything they can about it and to understand if what they're seeing displayed in things like movies and social media is in fact true or if it's false. A lot of the time, people just take something, you accept it, and you move on with your life. It's not the only thing you're thinking about. But even in that is something really curious. So what I'm going to do, we've expanded a lot. I'm now going to rein it in, okay? So I'm just setting up a whole bunch of ideas, a whole bunch of background. And now let's talk about the topic of this video, this idea of Italian neighborhoods. Because what happens when we start looking at things like movies and social media and we're sharing stories? In many situations, we're talking about the past. You see people like Sebastian Maniscalco, who I want to give a shout out to. He is a very famous American comedian who I think blew up largely thanks to social media. He had this 2014 special called Aren't You Embarrassed? And I think that is the thing that really set off his career because there were certain things in that really became iconic. He spoke about being Italian American, but attending a Shabbat dinner, I believe it was. He talked about his father and what happened when there was an animal that was coming in their yard and eating all their fruits and vegetables and how the Italian father took care of it. He spoke about going on a date and how he had the Italian evil eye horn to ward off the evil eye in the car. Talking about these things. And this stuff resonated really strongly with people. And it created this sort of rallying behind this idea, these stories, being like, that's what it was like in my childhood. That's what it was like in my family, in my neighborhood. And then he even has other things that he talks about. I don't know if it's in the Aren't You Embarrassed special. I think it was an earlier one he did, where he said when the doorbell would ring when he was a kid, everyone would be so excited. They'd run to the door, they'd open it up. Your mother would have the Entenmann's cake waiting that you couldn't eat. It was only for when guests came. But nowadays, when the doorbell rings, you want to pretend no one's home. And so when you see this stuff, anytime you really look into what a comedian says, I'm not the only person to talk about this, it's not a novel idea. There's really something in there. There's a reason why it's funny. There's a reason why it clicks with you. Because it's somebody on stage, not afraid of being politically correct or being censored, because usually comics, they swear, they say whatever they want, they can say offensive things. That's generally the notion with comedy, that you sort of forgive things that maybe people in other areas of society would not forgive because they're like, well, this is made to laugh. This is where we all kind of let loose and exhale. So as he's sharing these things, it's really resonating with people. And when you look deeper into it, it's telling us something. It's about human behavior. It's about identity. It's about shared history, lived experience. It all kind of comes back to this thing. And so I would say that his story on the doorbell ringing is what was really the inspiration for making this video today. And that's why I'm mentioning that skit. You can go on YouTube and see all this stuff. Another famous comic called Marcelo Hernandez on Saturday Night Live just did a very popular sketch of Sebastian Maniscalco. It's got a lot of views and a lot of people I heard were talking about it. Because there's something about the way he moves, the way he acts, the way it is also fitting into this Italian American idea that we see so often displayed in our media. It all kind of connects and it's like, oh yeah, Italian American, there it is. So there's something to do with all of this. And so what is this idea of why it ain't like it used to be? Why did I put that in the title? Why do I want to talk about that? It's something I think a lot about. I don't have any one solid reason why there may be this sentiment, what we should do about it, or how we got here. But I have a few ideas, a few theories, and that's what I'm going to share with you guys. The way that I think about things like the Italian American community in the United States, particularly I would say in the Northeast of the United States, I'm going to be focusing mainly on that because a whole nother topic is the concept of being of an Italian background. So let's say Italian American, but growing up in the South of the US, in the Midwest, on the West Coast, and being away from that New York, Northeast Italian American way, which is its own thing. So that's a whole nother topic we can discuss. But just focusing on this northeastern part and that culture, Sebastian Maniscalco comes from the Midwest. He's from Illinois, so it's a little different, but still very similar. Chicago and New York, there's some similarities there. But it's still a little different, little slightly different flavor, if you will, different accent, you know? So the reason why I'm bringing all this stuff up and talking about it and talking about the neighborhoods is I want to share with you these theories that I have. And what I was getting to was, before I went on that little short tangent, I think of the Italian American community in a way like the British monarchy. I happen to find monarchies really interesting, kingdoms, castles, Harry Potter, all that kind of stuff, old churches. I'm very much fascinated by the ancient world and that kind of stuff. So I often think about Queen Elizabeth II, who was King Charles's mother, the Queen, right? As we have come to know in modern history. It's almost like if you were to study the monarchy, in a way, the monarchy kind of started with her because it was after all of this chaos that happened before she rose to the throne. Changes in kings quite quickly, her uncle, then her father, and then her as a young person. And then she has this really long reign. And royal watchers often say she never had a toe out of line. She never put a toe out of line. She just did it the right way. It's almost kind of like the monarchy started with her. She sort of set the standard, right? And she was also of that particular generation, which is very much like the generation I think of as my grandparents, which is where like my family history begins in the United States because they were the first ones to come here and sort of started the whole thing. So in a way, I think of the Italian communities in that similar vein where there's this group of people that came and they just kind of started it all. They started the family, started the community, started the neighborhoods. It all began with them. They created the standard. What though ends up happening when that generation, when that group of people goes? Well, you now have a new monarch, right? We now have King Charles. And the monarchy is going to have some things that are the same, but some things are going to be different. And it's not only because the monarch is different, the world is different. So as much as maybe a monarch would perhaps want to keep things the way that they were, things inevitably change. There are things that you cannot expect. If you follow anything to do with the British royal family and the tabloids and the British press and all that stuff, you will know there are stories every single day, okay? And there's a lot that goes on. And that's similar to, I use that as an analogy. I use that as a way to sort of compare something like a community like the Italian American community. It's just not as studied or written about as something like the British monarchy. And so why do we say things like it ain't like it used to? Well, sometimes there are things outside of our control, even if you want them to be the same. They can't be because time goes on. But I want to kind of touch on this for a little bit. I want to touch on this idea that it started with them, right? So in continuing to share some of my theories. So they all arrive in the United States, talking about the New York area. They settle in really congested parts of town. Think of the original Little Italy of Manhattan. And if you study even very little about Little Italy in Manhattan, you'll learn about something called tenements, which were not very nice living conditions. Communal bathrooms, some buildings perhaps didn't have bathrooms. It wasn't very glamorous. So they're living in these tight neighborhoods. They're learning a new language. They're in a new country. They're not necessarily welcomed with open arms by every other group that is there. It's difficult to get work, difficult to make money, difficult just to survive. You're having a family and kids. You're having all this kind of stuff go on in life and just society in general, life in general. What ends up happening? Well, we generally start talking about once the Italians started making more money, they started moving away from these neighborhoods. So these neighborhoods at first had everything they needed as time went on and they rose up a little in society. You got your local butcher, who's also an Italian. You have your tailor, who's also an Italian. You have maybe a restaurant or a fruit vendor, who's also Italian. It's Italians helping one another. It's a support system. What is also unifying them? Their shared language. These are people from the country of Italy, and they're communicating to each other, yes, in their regional dialects, but there is the overarching theme of Italian that is binding them together. So they're going to their Italian mass at the local Italian church. There's an Italian priest, which is the son of someone in the family. There's this entire network that is completely created. And it is what I call a support system. But then as time goes on, they start making more money and things in life start changing. They're now building homes out in the suburbs. The so-called American dream of that time was to have the white picket fence. You're married, you got your two kids, a boy and a girl, and you've got a car, right? Because a car is freedom, and you're living the American dream. You're living that good life out, and you have your own land for you, where you can do your own garden, grow your own vegetables. You're going to cut your own lawn. The kids are going to play in the neighborhood. You've got your sidewalk lined with the trees. Then there was that ideal. There was that life. And then what ends up happening also as time goes on? Well, Italians are not only hanging out with Italians. They're not only speaking Italian. Parents don't want their children to learn Italian because there are a number of reasons. It can be discrimination. It could be, well, you're born here, you are American, be American, live an American life. And for social mobility, you want your kids to have every opportunity possible and to not be looked at as an immigrant or an other or a foreigner. So you're losing a bit of the language, maybe losing a bit of the culture at the same time, because maybe you want to start doing American traditions. You want to have that turkey on Thanksgiving Day. You want when your kids to go to school to be able to relate to all the other kids whose parents have maybe been here for a generation or two before your parents. And then Italians are not only marrying Italians, they're marrying non-Italians. They're integrating more and more into society. They're rising up, getting different jobs. They're starting to get higher education. They're joining the military. They're a part of the war. Thanks to things like the GI Bill, they're then able to go to college. So there are all of these factors playing into it. I'm giving a real general, broad overview, okay? But we've got all these things happening. And then what happens today? How do we end up where we are now? Well, all of these things keep happening. But then, if you think about something, as I was mentioning before, my grandparents' generation, which is the same generation as Queen Elizabeth. This generation was around for a long time. They had longevity, a lot of them. When you have Italianità or Italianness, or that culture embodied in a person, they're doing the Sunday dinners, as a lot of people talk about. They're making the sauce in the summertime. They're making the homemade wine. They're doing the sausages that are hanging from your ceiling in the basement or in your garage. They're drying the peppers. They're going to the Italian mass. They're the volunteers at the local Italian summer feast at the church. So they are still living that out while their children are living pretty much fully American lives. They're speaking English. Maybe they can communicate with their parents a little bit in dialect, a couple words, but if they go to Italy, it's not always that easy to get around. They've got a strong Southern Italian accent because of their parents and how they heard Italian, but they can't write Italian. They're not up to date on all of the new Italian singers or pop culture in Italy, or they don't even know much about Italian history, but they still, comunque, feel tied to Italianness and their Italian identity thanks to the life they've lived. They've got Italian parents. They had Italian grandparents, Italian aunts or uncles. They've even had family visiting from Italy. So they feel very much Italian, but they're completely American. But then what ends up happening? The older generation starts passing away, and you no longer have Italianness in a person. So now, how does it fall on this, for all intents and purposes, American generation to now suddenly become Italian and to carry that out in life and to preserve it in their family? Well, it's a little challenging. It's a little challenging. It can be done, and the Italian communities and the Italian neighborhoods are not completely gone. If you go to one of those summer Italian feasts, if you go to an Italian mass, if you go to that Italian bakery, if you go to that Italian restaurant that is known as having, the old Italian guy in the kitchen or something, you're going to find people that are still a part of these communities, these neighborhoods. They just don't live in the same place anymore. So where we're at today is we're now going to meeting places to continue that culture and to continue those ideas. But we're sort of collectively trying to figure out, how do we do it? Because these people are not the immigrants. They're not the Italians who came here and were that first generation, that Queen Elizabeth that started the monarchy, if you will, with all the conditions that made it possible as well, the systemic things that made it possible. It wasn't like they necessarily had to go really out of their way to live an Italian life. There were so many Italians around them. You moved to a certain neighborhood because you know your buddies from your hometown were there. Your hometown in Italy, I mean. And so you had this whole system that was created because they needed it. It's a mode of survival, a means of survival, and also a way to feel yourself. It's your identity. Who am I? I may have moved, but I'm still who I am. And you may feel even more strongly Italian being in that foreign context because that's all you have. You have yourself to be the representation. I often say to people this one-liner, this is a one-liner I always use. I never felt more American in my whole life than the first time I went to Italy. Because everywhere I went, the Italians would tell me very quickly and with the sort of precision and certainty and directness that Italians usually speak with. Sei americano. I was like, whoa. In the American context, they're calling me Italian. Now, at this point in my life, after spending so much time, as I was telling you guys, the Italy-Italian world, if I say I'm Italian in America, sometimes it just feels wrong. I'm not Italian. I'm American because that's what they told me. But in the American context, I have to say, well, I'm Italian. I'm not from Italy. I'm not Italian. If that is the definition of the word, then I am not. But then you have to understand culturally, we have different ways of using words. So it's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with those terms. But I'm just saying there's so much more nuance to all of it. So we're already around the half-hour mark. So I kind of want to wrap up this story. And I'm just sort of presenting you guys with all these ideas, and we can continue to dig deeper into them. Even in my graduate work, I'm also looking into this stuff too. So that's also why I want to share it with you, because this is even a part of my academic studies. It's not only just something I'm genuinely curious about. I now have like a means to kind of do something more with this information than just sort of theorize on my own. I can do something a bit more concrete. This is something concrete, but also doing something in that academic space with other people that have been dealing with these ideas. It's kind of exciting for me. It is exciting, not kind of. It is exciting. So to sort of recap and get to the heart of what I was talking about with the neighborhoods, I think the reason why it ain't like it used to be is because, first of all, this is a point I haven't yet made. You can live the life you want to live, so long as you work towards realizing it. Many times, I don't get told this anymore, but many times in the past, I would get told, how do you have the time? How do you find the time to learn Italian, run a channel, run your website, give lessons, do this, and then have a full-time job, have a life, have your friends, have your family, have everything else you do, your extracurricular activities, and still have time to do the laundry, right? For me, the answer was always really simple. When you really like something, you don't feel like you're finding the time. You don't even really feel like you're making the time, but I'll work with that. You do make the time. It just is. It simply is a part of your life because it's important to you. Just like you make the time for the people that are most important to you in your life or the activities that are most important to you, you prioritize and you build a life around and including the things that you want. So if you really think about it, if people really wanted to have things be like they used to be, they would be actively working together to make it happen. Because at the end of the day, it just involves simple things. You invite someone over, you call them, you hang out with them, you cook something for them. You can actively participate in doing whatever you want, including keeping your community alive. It's not always very easy, if it's not being reciprocated and not being paid forward and not everyone then collectively agreeing and doing it. It's sort of like when we talk about the local, like, last standing Italian place, right? In that old Italian community where Italians used to live, let's say 50 years ago. People usually get upset when then that store closes. It could be a record store, a souvenir store, it could be a bakery, a restaurant. But the thing that I always say is, well, how often have you actually gone to support it? Are you there every week eating there on a Saturday night? In many situations, the answer is no. There are some people that do that. There are what I call the professional restaurant goers. They are there. They've got places on rotation and they go. More power to you. But in many situations, a lot of people say, oh, I'm so sad that place is closing, but they haven't gone there in 10 years. But what do we like if you identify with something? You want your outside world to reflect how you feel within, because it's all identity. And if you still see that stronghold standing, you're like, okay, the battle is still won. And when it closes, it feels like, oh, wow, so things really are changing. But what I say is, if you want something, when was the last time you opened a store? You know, what's the reason also why a lot of communities change? How often do you think people really want to work in a store? Working in a store is a wonderful thing. Working in a restaurant is a wonderful thing. But it is not generally seen, as the most desirable profession to have. It doesn't come off as the most lucrative of ways or the best way to have social mobility if that's what you're interested in. A lot of people are interested in those things. Do they want to always stay in the small town while everyone else is moving, traveling, doing whatever, not having to worry about being open 24/7 because maybe a customer is coming? And if you don't sell something off of your shelf, you do not make money. It's not like a service job when you're salaried. And when you're sitting at your desk, whether you do 10 tasks or one, you're getting paid the same amount. You've still got your vacation time. You've still got your benefits. But that's not always the case for someone who's working at that local record store in the old Italian neighborhood that's been open since 1965. So, unfortunately, the only way these things continue is if people decide that they want them to continue. If they're frequenting them, if they're opening them, if they're making it happen, and the customers have got to come, you know? So then you can have the great idea, you can invest the money, you can open the place, but are people coming? They've got to come in order for it to exist. So what I'm basically saying is, to now wrap up the video, we're a little longer than usual, but it took me a while also to get to the meat of today's video. We're going to see how things pan out. It's not totally dead. The battle is still going on, all right? If you want to call it a battle. We don't have to call it that word. But it's still happening. If you go to these places, that is where we still see the community alive. You've got to go to the Italian pizzeria, the bakery, the restaurant, the store, the small little market, the butcher, the mass. They're still alive. The community is still alive and well. It's just different now. I don't think it's ever going to become again a whole community where, you know, people think of the films, right? You have the mom yelling outside the balcony on Mulberry Street in New York City saying, Yamarind, vieni a mangiare. I don't think that's going to happen again because that was a time and a place. That was that time. It doesn't still mean, though, that we can't have future nostalgia. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have nostalgia one day for right now. It doesn't mean that you can't create something even more beautiful in the future. We have to still dream and still hope. But I think, yes, Italian neighborhoods are different. It ain't like it used to, but that's okay. Because think about this, and I'll leave you with this thought. Maybe not everybody liked it when the doorbell rang and everyone would have to stop what they're doing and entertain a guest, who then maybe didn't leave until midnight or maybe drank a little too much of the homemade wine, which has got a pretty high alcohol percentage if you've ever experienced homemade wine before. Maybe it wasn't always desirable. Maybe not everyone always liked it. If people really liked it, I think they'd continue. But I think people have fuller lives. They have more jobs, they have more money, they have more things to do. They don't only have their community as their only support system or their only form of entertainment or socializing. So I think there's always work to be done. We can always improve and get better. But I just want to leave you with that idea. It's very easy to look back on the past and say it was better. And why ain't it like it used to? I'm starting to get older myself. I'm not an old person. I consider myself very young, but I am in my 30s now. And I've lived enough where I'm now starting to see people talk about glory days of my generation, the millennial generation, and they're glorifying times like, let's say, 2004, 2005, 2006, which wasn't that long ago. It still was 20 years ago. I lived through those days. There was some awesome stuff about it, and there was some rotten stuff about it too that I'm very happy we don't have anymore. There are certain things I still wish we had, but I'm also like, nostalgia is a little bit of a rose-colored glass, okay? It's not all rose fiori, as we can say in Italian. It's not all, daisies and butterflies. I'll admit there was a lot that was wonderful about those times. But when you're separated from something, when you're no longer constrained by it or you no longer have to live under it because it's the only reality you have, you can appreciate the most beautiful side of it and celebrate it. And I think we should. It's sort of like if you think about a political figure or any kind of historical figure, people will often say, what's their legacy going to be? How will history remember them? Because once you've got history, you can look at something from a more objective perspective and not a subjective perspective. And you can say, oh, shame we didn't really appreciate this when we had it. That was kind of cool. But thus is life. That's what happens. So I think this is all really fascinating stuff. I'm still in the midst of figuring this out. I don't know if I will ever come to a point where I completely figure it out. This is an ongoing study. It's an ongoing understanding because our situation changes, life changes, society does as well. But I'm very curious to hear from you guys what you think, if you have any thoughts on this, if you've ever looked into this. And I know some people prefer just to send me an email or to tell me when we meet during our group lessons. I'm always very happy to do that. In fact, it's even better than a YouTube comment because it's so much more sincere. It's an actual interaction between us. But YouTube comments work too, and the algorithm likes them. It helps promote the video, so I'm not going to say no to that. Not going to say no to that. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's given you some food for thought and made you think a little bit. And I would say the takeaway, besides that idea of not everyone always wanted to answer the door, I don't want to make it sound, though, like I'm being one of those people who's like, it's not what you think. It actually sucked. That's just one side of the coin. There is also another side of the coin, which is it's a beautiful thing for someone to knock on the door and you welcome them in. I think that's wonderful. And I've experienced that many times in my life. Many, many times. I've been in the houses where the door is open and people just come in. And it's always a celebration. I know what that's like. I've lived it. And it's a beautiful thing. But I think sometimes a call before you're coming is also really nice too. So I think we can have a little bit of everything in life. It just doesn't have to be either or. It could be and. Always remember to spread the love, guys, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Ciao ragazzi. Ciao. Ciao. Ciao.